Welcome to the 2020 August 19th edition of the Urban League Jobs Network Digital Career Success Series. My name is Kenneth L. Johnson. I'm your host and president of the Harlem, New York-based diversity recruitment firm East Coast Executives. I'm really excited today. We are in straight improv mode today, right? So let me kind of give you some background on how this works. Today, we're going to speak about escaping the resume black hole with Kashawn Holloway of Indeed.com. He's a recruitment evangelist there. And honestly, every time I talk to this gentleman or speak with this gentleman, I just am more amazed at what he brings to the table in this work we do in supporting and representing underrepresented groups. Let me just back it up a little here. So Mr. Holloway, I want to speak your praises. Kashawn Holloway is a recruitment evangelist at Indeed, the #1 job site in the world. As a member of the Employer Insights team, he has the distinct pleasure of telling Indeed's story on stage at events, during industry-wide webcasts, and in conference rooms of some of the world's largest companies. He brings 9+ years of customer service, employer branding, diversity and inclusion, and recruitment advertising experience to all conversations when educating key decision makers on these brands about recruitment strategies. This is what he does, and he does it each and every day. So today, I'm just gonna let him tell you a little bit about himself, and I swear to you, we're just gonna jump into some questions here on the platform and just go. Is that all right with you today, my friend?
Yes, sir.
I love it. I love it. Look, a lot of people don't choose to come on here and just improv, so I appreciate you taking on the challenge and letting us just rapid fire throw questions at you, and then you just share your expertise with everyone.
Yeah, no, it's my pleasure. Any opportunity to talk about the intersection of recruiting and technology, especially for underserved groups, I'm your guy. So I'm happy to do it.
Yes, you are indeed. So listen, tell the audience a little bit about yourself. I know before, we've been on a couple conversations with Devin, Felix from the National Urban League, and we've just started speaking about the different things that you do. You do a lot out here, my friend. So tell the audience a little bit about your work.
Yeah, of course. So my full-time job is as a recruitment evangelist at Indeed. So you can really see me as a recruitment strategy coach for some of those top brands. So making sure that they're really reducing the barriers to entry for candidates, especially those from those underrepresented groups. One of those barriers is the application process. So even from my side of the conversation, an example, which I'm sure everyone on this call can relate to, when you upload your resume to an application, you do that, and then they ask you to fill out all of your work history on top of that. So that's a conversation that I have, is to have those companies to stop doing that and reducing that process, so it's easier for you to apply for the job, especially if you're qualified. But on the candidate side, making sure that you, as we're going to have a conversation today, are using all of those secret, tips and tricks to make sure that your resume passes the tests and gets through the system and gets in front of a recruiter, so that you are, considered for the job and you're not automatically rejected from it before you even have a human read it.
Now, tell me about the recruitment evangelist title. The first time we spoke was just prior to the future of work conversation. And I wanted you to be involved with that because I just believe that you are at the forefront of the technology piece. That's it's part of every job search right now, right? Yeah. And that's, you guys are the entryway into employment opportunities for the world right now. So I wanted you to be part of that conversation because I believe you bring extreme value in speaking to those things. So just tell me where that comes from. Recruitment evangelist. Tell me a little more about that.
Yeah, so it's funny. I feel like I've always been a recruitment evangelist for years at this point, since college, especially, crafting my own career, but also supporting my friends and colleagues and classmates and family members in their job search as well. But when you think about evangelism, it's really about spreading the good word. And that's why I take my job really seriously and working on two fronts. So this whole recruitment process is not just, catering to a large company that's trying to hire people. That's one side of it, where I do act as that coach and making sure that they are writing inclusive job descriptions. They're not writing things that would deter a candidate from applying, making sure that they're listing out what are their job duties, what are the responsibilities, but not having it be, 20 bullet points long. Sure. You need to get to the core of it. Especially thinking about women, and when they apply to jobs, they always want to make sure that they fit 100% of those bullet points, where a man, if I fit about 70%, I'm going to go for it. and apply for it. And, the research validates that, but really making sure on that side, I'm being the voice of the job seeker in those rooms that they don't have access to. So I really take that privilege that I have to make that voice heard, giving them recommendations that are going to make their process a lot easier for qualified candidates to get through the door. So it's one side of it. I also take it upon myself to do a lot of this advocacy work outside of my day-to-day job, where I'll have conversations like this, where I can connect with job seekers on a larger scale, giving them tips and tricks on how to update their resume, how to navigate the process, but even on the diversity and inclusion side too, which I'm very passionate about. I'm one of the original members from Indeed's Black Inclusion Group. I'm also very active in our I Pride LGBT group. So anything to help those groups and intersection of that, because I fit under both communities, I like to help them as well in any way to make sure that that presence and voice is also incorporated into the conversation, because we want to make sure that everyone has a fair shot to get into the company, but also to be able to thrive once they get there.
Man, you spoke about intersectionality, and I think it's really important, especially on this platform, the Urban League's Jobs Network Digital Career Success Series platform, because, so we see this all the time, right? Black women, right? So like the intersectionality of one, women getting hired, but then Black people getting hired. And then, you start swinging through LGBTQ, right? People living with disabilities, whatever it may be. People that are veterans. So there's all this intersectionality, and I think it comes to this platform maybe even a little more organically than it comes to other platforms, just because of what the National Urban League represents in general. All right, so you know what, you were speaking about kind of how the position descriptions are structured and things of that nature. I think her name's Karen Snyder from Textio. You familiar with that platform?
Yes.
Yeah, they do some great work and kind of assisting and supporting position description authors with how their position descriptions attract certain populations. Is there work in the Indeed platform that kind of allows for that as well?
So it's funny that you mentioned Textio. So sometimes I'll mention to my clients that I'm human Textio in a sense. So that's a part. So yeah, that is a part of my job.
Right?
Yeah, so I don't know if I'm allowed to trademark that or not. So we'll
I think that'd be interesting though. I think people would get it, right?
Yes.
So listen, I'm looking at the chat. The chat is crazy already.
Great.
Like people all through the chat. So thanks everyone for checking in. I'm going to ask people to jump over to the Q&A section to submit questions, but we'll be looking at the chat as well. So thank you all for just being so active and just being here and present. We bring people like Mr. Holloway here so you guys can interact directly with them. So please, I don't know at the end, but I'm sure we'll share contact information. I see people from Connecticut are chiming in. I know that's your home state.
Oh yeah.
We're all right over there in Connecticut. All right, listen, let's just jump into it. I want to start throwing some questions your way.
Great.
You okay with that?
Let's do it.
Let's go. All right, so I do this work, and all the time when I'm doing workshops, whether it's workshops at the National Urban League Conference or it's for the New York Urban League or just some East Coast executive stuff, I hear people say, Ken, what file type is most ATS friendly? And when people speak the term ATS, kind of give people an education on what that is for me.
Yeah, of course. And thank you for asking that. A big part of my work is speaking, and a big part of that is defining the terms that we use. So thank you. Let's lay the foundation. So ATS is short for Applicant Tracking System. In most terms, you really think of that as your online application that you fill out for a company. That's an applicant tracking system where that company collects all of the resumes for every job seeker that applies to the jobs. They also will send you your offer letter and do a lot of HR stuff in the background through that system. But an ATS is simply where you fill out your application online.
And it looks like I've seen some statistics out there, and it's kind of 90+% of all companies are using ATS systems.
Yes.
So is that pretty accurate?
That is accurate. So, which I'm so happy to have this conversation, because everyone on this call, more than likely, you're going to be applying through an ATS. So you want to make sure that you're taking these things into account as we talk about it, because your application that you're filling out is most likely through a company's ATS. And there are many, but a lot of them do follow the same structure in a lot of ways, where a lot of these tips will help you regardless of what platform you're on.
Amazing. Amazing. Listen, all right. So what file is the best type of file for an actual ATS?
Yes. So when you're filling out an application online, my recommendation is to keep it as simple as possible. So submitting it as a Word document. So when you're on, Microsoft Word, just filling it out in that format. I always recommend staying away from a PDF format in that case when you're filling it out online, because sometimes the applicant tracking system can't necessarily read everything on the ATS. But if you have a Word document, it's a lot easier for that system to scan all of the keywords, which is what it's looking for when you fill out your application. So just make sure that you save your resume as a Word document. And of course, you can have a PDF version that you have saved if you want to send it directly to a recruiter or directly to someone else. But I recommend if you're going directly online, use it as a Word document.
Yeah, I hear, and I always tell people, sometimes you'll see, there'll be a prompt and it'll say that PDFs are accepted, but they may not come over on the same side as a Word doc. Like they may not parse.
Yes.
They won't actually. So there's some challenges with that. So if you can send a Word doc, it seems like it makes complete sense to do that.
Exactly.
All right, so let's keep it going. Now, I'm a candidate and I'm applying to a job, right? Should I try to stand out by adding, I don't know, photos, graphs, any type of graphic, color? Should I use those tools to stand out a little?
So short answer, no. Don't do that. If you're applying online, and that again goes back to the ATS system, it's interesting. It's a very smart and complex technology where it's essentially, artificial intelligence that's reading your resume and looking to pick up keywords and information and looking at the most simple text form that comes up. Anytime that you add graphs or photos or anything like that, it complicates it. And sometimes that information gets jumbled in translation. It may mess up your resume on the other side. So anytime that you do that when you're applying directly online, it might put you at a disadvantage. So I recommend keeping it just words. Don't add any extra bells and whistles, because at the end of the day, what you submit from your side may not look exactly the same once it gets over to the recruiter or on the other side of the ATS.
Yeah, I think that's the one interesting thing. People think that just because you've submitted it as such here, it's going to come out that way on the other side. And sometimes it doesn't. So why run the gamble, right?
Exactly.
All right. So, we're speaking about things that people may want to avoid doing, but give me some impactful things. What are things that will create and add value in your submission?
Yeah. So some quick tips and tricks that you can use. So let's look at your resume. So we're looking to build it in a Word document. So we've already, checked that off. When you're looking to do that, my first thing is making sure that you keep everything within the body of that document. So you may notice on your Word document, you'll see kind of a gray line at the top and at the bottom, and those are the header and the footer of that document. Keeping in mind that any information that you put in there may not be picked up by the ATS. So if you put something in there, it's effectively invisible to the system. So you want to make sure that everything you include is in the body of that. So that also includes your contact information. That's, definitely the most important part of information you want on your resume. If they think you're qualified for the job, you want them to be able to find you. So making sure that you include that in the body and try to avoid putting any information in that top header or the bottom footer section. So that's the first recommendation. The other thing that I recommend, especially since we talked about graphs and photos and things that you're trying to highlight, if you can't include that in that Word document, I always recommend linking to a profile of your work. So if you have an online portfolio, or if your work is in graphic design or UX or UI, making sure that you do have your online portfolio and link that, or link it to your LinkedIn page, whatever it might be. But that's another way that you can, quickly kind of slide that in there, but it doesn't take up space and it's not going to put you at a disadvantage when you submit through the ATS. Some other small tips I can give you as well, just keeping it good. Some other things are keeping it in chronological order. So, in our culture, we usually read left to right and top to bottom. So you also want to make sure that you put your most recent work history up top and work backwards for the most relevant jobs that you have for the job that you're applying for. Some other things to include as well, and these are just words that an ATS will typically scan for and try to pick up, is words like work experience. So when you have your header on your resume, have work experience, and that's where you'll list the different jobs that you have. Put skills, and then have all the different skills or technologies that you're familiar with, and even things like education. Just using those additional keywords will make it easier for the resume, for the ATS to read your resume and scan it, to make sure that they can pick up to see if you are qualified based off of the qualifications that that company has outlined for the ATS to look for.
You know, I think that's important information, because those are items that both respond to, well, so they're user-friendly items for the system and for a human that's looking at your resume. I think people think unilaterally, like, right, I'm going to make a resume that gets through the applicant tracking system. But eventually that resume may be seen by a human as well, right? So you want it to be user-friendly for those eyes as well. Any other tips that you think maybe cater to both sides of that equation?
Yeah, so that's a great point too, where the goal is to, appeal to that robot or that, artificial intelligence, but the human intelligence who's eventually going to read it and get you in front of the hiring manager. So a few other things that you can do just from the eye of a human is your font that you choose. So making sure that it is very professional. Some of the standard fonts are, of course, Times New Roman, Arial, Georgia. Those are kind of the standard fonts that are usually acceptable in these settings, but also easy to read from an ATS or artificial intelligence standpoint. I always, stay away from Comic Sans or anything too flashy where a system can't read it, but also that a human may have a hard time deciphering as well. So that's my recommendation. And then the last thing, which I always recommend for everybody, and this is helpful regardless of what industry that you're in, what level you are. So if you're entry level or VP level, using action verbs. That's really important. So using words like you outperformed, you solved something, you delivered on something, or you manage, X amount of budget for a project. But really talking about your accomplishments. And I'm a big proponent, humble brag about yourself as much as you can in that resume. You want to stand out. Yeah. So you want to do that. You want to make sure that they see, okay, great. I have all the keywords that match for the job, but I'm also really good at the job too. I'm not just another cookie cutter candidate. I actually can deliver and give you results as well. So I always recommend doing that, because those are some words that ATS will look for. But once that recruiter gets to take a look at it, they'll also be able to see, okay, they're not just another, Java developer or another customer service representative. They are, the best in their field. And I definitely want to talk to them and get them in for an interview.
So you were speaking about action verbs, and I think it's really interesting. So we were working with Indeed on a resume project, right? And I wasn't aware of this until we started partnering in that way. But there are some resume guides out there resource guides out there that you guys have that provide that information for people. Where do people go to receive that type of information?
Yes. So indeed.com/career-guide. And you'll have a lot of information, or indeed.com/career-advice. It's our Indeed online career guide. So it's really helpful. There's resume templates, there's interview questions that you can run through. And it's funny, Ken, we were talking yesterday about my cousin who was helping him with his job search, and he actually got the job today, he told me.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
So, Marquise, was it Marquise?
Marquez, yes.
Marquez, yes, there we go.
So congrats to him. Yeah, I don't know if you're on here. Not to put your business out there. But but he got the job today, which is really exciting. And a lot of the resources that I gave him came from that career guide, where there were resume templates and there were practice interview questions. And we have it in written format, but we also have a lot of video content too. And I think that raises your point about even people who have disabilities. You want to make sure that the content is accessible. So making sure that it's not just written form, there's also video format as well with closed captioning for those people. So we have tons of resources. Recommend going there. I'm sure we can drop it in the chat as well, but I always recommend going there because there's so much you can do and just build on, a lot of the content there, and you don't have to reinvent the wheel either.
I'm glad you brought up the chat, because if I don't get to some of these questions in the chat,
okay,
we're going to be talking bad about the two of us, right? Okay. So people are on here. We got Naya. She wants to know, what's the best way to figure out which keywords to include?
Great question, Naya. So that's really the big secret in all of this, is finding those right keywords. So another term I want to explain is search engine optimization. So that's a really, fancy way of saying keyword matching. So for you, let's say you're looking for a customer service job. Let's just keep it really simple. If I'm looking for a customer service job, the best way that you can identify some of those top keywords is actually just looking at the different jobs that show up in your search. So if the job that you're applying for, I always recommend doing, if you have a Mac, do Command F, or if you have a PC, do Control F, and just do a search for some of those words. So look up customer service and see how many times it shows up, in that keyword. Or as you're reading it, if you notice a certain word is coming up a few times, that seems like a skill that job is really looking for in a candidate. So you, on the other side, want to make sure that you want to include those keywords in your resume so that the system sees you as a relevant candidate. And ultimately, when it gets in front of that recruiter, they also see, okay, this person has customer service experience. They mentioned it about 8 different times in their resume. I think they're definitely going to be a good fit for this job. Let me give them a call.
Incredible. So you know what? We got some people on the line and they're speaking about using word clouds and things of that nature.
Yeah. So that's another great tip too. So if you want to, and that's actually awesome, what you would do is just copy that job description and throw it into a word cloud. And you can just Google word cloud generator on Google and find, there's so many that you can use. Copy the text from that description, throw it in that word cloud generator, and see which words come up as the largest word. And that means that it was shown up the most in that description. So that's a great workaround where you can do that to see, okay, if I see a software engineer job, but this one is leaning more towards Java versus C#, you can figure out what skill sets you really need to boast about in your resume as well. So I think definitely using a word cloud is a really smart choice as well.
Definitely a great choice. Listen, so I'm going to read some of these verbatim, but people want to know, is it even worth it to apply through ATS systems, or should you try to get referrals from someone in the company first?
Yes. So that's another great question. My recommendation is, of course, if you know someone there, or if you know someone who knows someone, try to get that referral. Research also shows that referral programs are usually, they have a higher rate for candidates. So essentially you have a better chance of getting the job if you go through a referral program. My only thing with that is just making sure that you do know that person and you have that introduction. You don't just want to, reach out to somebody just for that job. You want to make that connection. So statistically, referrals are great if you do have that opportunity. If not, using these, tips that we talked about, having the right file format, using these, action verbs, and using the right keywords for the job are going to get you past the system in front of a human as well. So there's definitely benefit in applying. However, if you do know someone, you do have a better chance just statistically.
Makes complete sense. So another question here, and this is from Randis. How far back should your resume go?
So that really depends on the situation. My recommendation is always highlighting the work experience that aligns with the job that you're applying for. So if you're applying for a marketing specialist role, any jobs or internships that you've had that incorporated some of that, where maybe some jobs you've had in between don't necessarily make sense for that job or don't highlight the skills that you need to do that job, I would maybe leave those out and still go back into it. So you can really go back as far as your work history, provides. I know a lot of the times a conversation comes up about ageism in the workplace. So let's say if you do have 20 plus years of experience, you may be seen as overqualified or maybe pushed out of it. But in previous conversations too, I recommend just highlighting the skills that are relevant to the job, but also another piece for that ageism piece, I always recommend just showing anything that you've done with continued education. So if you've done any certificate programs or are part of any professional associations or coming to conversations like this hosted by the, Urban League Jobs Network, you just want to show that continued growth that you're, on the forefront of the fields and you're not, just resting on your laurels of having 20 years of experience. But I would say go as far back as you want, but just making sure the jobs that you do highlight on your resume are relevant to the jobs that you're applying for.
Yeah, it's all about having the relevant experience, right? Mm-hmm. So you don't want to have jobs that are, 15, 20 years ago, but they don't apply or really provide any skill sets essential to the job that you're applying for now. So cool. I get it. I get that people want to show that they do a lot of different things, but although companies need generalists, they hire specialists. Mm-hmm. They really do hire people that can do the work that's stated in the actual position description. So that's great advice. Exactly. We have someone, what is it, Erica? She wants to know, Well, you know what, Erica, we will provide the Indeed link that was mentioned, but also someone wants to know if you have any tips for applying to jobs out of state.
Yeah. So, and it's funny, I have a few friends who are doing that at the moment. So, my recommendation is to, of course, and this is where you use a cover letter many times in my recommendation, or even on your resume saying, moving to, XYZ city in whatever move date, if you already have plans to move. But my recommendation is to include that in your cover letter. So, talking about the work experience that you already have, mentioning that you're actively looking or in the process of moving to the area, and you have all the credentials to do the job. It's just a matter of geography. However, you will be local to that market or have the full intention and capacity to move to that market shortly. So that's one side. When you get to the application, on the search side, just the same thing. So looking for the right keywords in that particular market. So looking up, many times we've seen nuances, let's say for a sales representative. So if you work in sales, let's say in Boston, they might call it sales representative, but in Dallas, Texas, they may call those jobs account executives. So that's where I would do a little bit more of that market research as well to see what are even some jargon that's different, by geography as well, so that your resume includes those keywords that are more popular in certain pockets of the country. But for the application process, I would say just make sure that you have a really solid application with those relevant keywords. But I would definitely lean on your cover letter as well to help tell your story so that they don't have any fear that you don't live in the area as well.
Okay, yes. Is there a resource for adding keywords from different industries to your resume? You spoke about that. I think it's just about kind of doing your research, kind of being a detective. I tell people that often you just have to be a detective. You have to kind of take a deeper dive into the terminology that's being used in particular industries. And sometimes that just comes through doing research, correct?
Yes. So that's one part of it. So definitely looking at those jobs that you show up in your search, the ones that you really like, there's obviously something that's attracting you to that job. So looking at those keywords. The other part too that you can see in that Indeed career guide, there's a section where we have resume templates. And we also include, example resumes for those particular jobs. So let's say marketing specialist, we have an example resume of that, but we also have industry specific keywords or even skills and technologies that those professionals use as well. So that, I think there's over 100 resume templates in that, and literally we serve you up the keywords as well. So that's another way to do it in addition to some of your own research as well.
Excellent. I'm going to lock in here. Someone asked, is there a resume service that you can recommend that does professional resumes? All right, listen, let me take some of this off of you, Mr. Holloway.
Thanks.
So, I could say East Coast executives because we do resume, right? But also I know that, man, every year, and we weren't able to do it this year because of COVID, but the National Urban League Conference, career coaches, resume writers, LinkedIn profile professionals, all on site on the expo floor. I know you may not want to wait until next year, but listen, that's a great resource for anyone that's looking to get a resume done or get information that's vital to improving their resume. So I'm going to take that one from you. And I think you just mentioned, you guys have a ton of templates on the site that people can kind of use to refine and adjust their resume.
Yeah,
all right.
Exactly.
Okay, so Kevin's calling and he wants to know, how closely aligned should my background and qualifications be to a position before I consider applying or submitting my resume? I find that I talk myself out of applying far too often when considering positions that are on the next level of my career path. Any advice?
Yeah, so short answer, go for it. That's kind of the first thing. The second thing is a lot of it is introspection. So really understanding, looking within, looking at your work history, looking at the projects that you worked on. Do you see yourself as qualified for that next job? Do you see that, one, is it something that you do want to do? And two, do you feel like, with the right support, would you be able to succeed in that? So that's one part of it. And a lot of it is just, talking yourself up and having that, conversation with yourself to say, I am qualified for this. Maybe this is a director level job, and not getting intimidated by the title, but really looking at everything outside of the title. What's in those bullet points? What's the job at hand? And not getting tied up in that. I think we all can relate to that, having that little sense of imposter syndrome where we feel like we may not be good enough to do something, or we might be a little hesitant to say, I don't think I'm there yet. You probably are. there. So I would say do some introspection, look at your qualifications and see, you know what, I do have the skills, let me go for it. And the other part is making sure that your resume reads to that level. So if you're saying, if that job says you need to, overlook budget or work on X, Y, and Z projects or work with a specific technology or run XYZ program, being able to relate some of that back to what you've already done in your work history and sell that in your resume, then you're going to be fine. But I would say definitely go for it, because you never know what you might be qualified for or what a recruiter might see in you, where they will invest a little bit more in your training and coaching to get you up, exactly to what they're looking for. And you might be a better fit for the company versus another candidate who may be perfect on paper, but they may not have, that extra sauce that you need.
So, I think you bring up a valid point. So sometimes it's the negative self-talk, right?
Mm-hmm.
We start talking ourselves out of opportunities that maybe are right for us. But I do believe if you focus in on, quantifiable statements on your resume, right?
Mm-hmm.
Show how you've earned and or saved an organization money and or time, right? And then accomplishment-based statements. If you start speaking to the things that you've accomplished, and that's not just for your resume, but that's actually in the face-to-face interviews or the virtual interviews as well. If you can master those two things, then you start putting yourself into the conversation for opportunities that are maybe a level up, because they've seen you win and be successful. And you're giving examples, maybe through behavioral-based interview techniques or whatever it may be, but you're giving examples of times that you've overcame some obstacles. And I think that's vital. And I think that should translate over to a resume as well. So thank you for adding that piece. I have Tawanda wants to know, should you include a professional summary on your resume?
Yeah, I think any space where you can tell your story is definitely worthwhile. My recommendation is if you can also weave in some of those top keywords in that summary as well too, get in where you fit in and just do that as much as you can. I think there's nothing wrong with that. And it just gives some additional context to the recruiter, but it also will hit that ATS with some extra keywords that you've added in. So it's like kind of another way to sneak it in to get you past the system. But a recruiter can also quickly, read a paragraph about you and then also see your, work experience outlined for them.
I think that's important because we spoke about being effective on both sides, right? Mm-hmm. The ATS side and the actual human recruiter or hiring manager. So we already know that the recruiters aren't spending a lot of time with the resume. Some people say 6 to 8 seconds, mm-hmm. right? So if you have a summary, it's typically going to be at the top of your resume, and they may get to that. So if they see the keywords in that summary, it increases the chances that they'll stick around and look at the rest of your resume for a little while, right?
Exactly. And Ken, the way that I like to explain it too is you're doing the thinking for them. So make them think that you're, the best software engineer in the world. You're the best marketing executive. You're the best customer service representative in the world, or whatever your specialty is. But, that's your resume is your selling point and your calling card to do that. But this is definitely a great opportunity for you to be able to, do that humble bragging, if you will, but to really, sell it there and get past not just the robot, but also in front of the, the human as well.
Look, man, we said it was going to be rapid fire when we started out today, right? The questions are coming. You good? You still with me?
I'm good. I love it.
I love it. Man, clearly the audience is still here. So we're good right now. So Kara, she wants to know, should a resume be one page?
Hi, Kara. Yes. So that is a two-pronged question. So usually we'll say if you have, a longer work experience, putting it into, 2 pages is perfectly fine. I would say if your work experience that, spans a few different jobs is relevant for the job, there's nothing wrong with 2. We always recommend, if you only are, kind of entry level or early in your career, maybe, 1 to 3 years, try to stick to that one resume. And that's, that earlier question, figuring out, okay, you get to a certain point where I don't need to include my internships, or I don't need to include my first job in college. I can start with my most recent job and maybe the 1 or 2 I've had prior to that, but I don't need to give them my full background because that resume is going to be 8 pages long and they don't need to know that. So I would say it's a delicate dance, but my big deciding factor is if your work experience is relevant to the job that you're applying for, definitely stretch into that second page. And it does give you, extra keywords to get past the ATS. But, if it's not necessarily going to help your case or really build a good story, just try to stick to one page if you can. But I don't think it doesn't hurt to do two if it's going to help you in the long run.
You know what? So we speak a lot. You spoke earlier, about some formatting things, right? So we have Tanya, and she wants to know, how can I make sure my resume doesn't look too busy? And I'm thinking like bullet points are crucial to that, right? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so simplicity is key. So very simple headers, bolding, the header, so the work experience, the education, the skills section, bolding those, bolding your employer on that, but keeping those bullet points. A thing that I always look out for is how much white space is on the page. So making sure that it's not, too busy, too jumbled, but trying to go for it. Is this easy to read? And not just the flow of the sentences and the words that you're using, but when I look at this, do I want to, sit down and read this with a cup of coffee, or do I want to click out of this and run away? So that's, one thing to look at. And you can look at it from when you're looking at a job description as well. And this is literally what I tell to my clients. You look at this job description, it has 50 bullet points and I have to scroll 15 times to get to the bottom of it. Do you want to actually read it? Do you want to apply to this job? And it's the same thing. So looking at your resume, similar as you look at a job description, does it have a lot of white space? Are there headers? Are there bullet points? Does it look clean, simple, and easy to read? And other thing I do want to add too is that the complexity of your resume or the way that it looks doesn't necessarily speak to the complexity of you as a person or a professional. So you can know a lot, you can do a lot, you can have a lot of skills, but your resume can still be very simple and easy to read as well. So I also think that's a sign of intelligence in a way, is that if you're able to convey all of the amazing things about you and the things that you can do it in a simple format. It doesn't have to, include a bunch of, extraneous words and, bells and whistles. You can keep it simple. But I would say using some of those resume templates, but try to just keep simple bullet points, keep a lot of white space, and use those headers as much as possible. It's ATS friendly, but it will also be easy for the recruiter to read when they are looking at your resume in those 6 to 8 seconds that they usually spend.
Yeah, I think, keeping white space is really important on a resume. It has to be friendly to the eyes. Like people will literally just look at a resume and say, you know what, I can't do this right now.
Yeah.
So, all right. So, you know what, Christine checks in. She says hi as well. She said hi. She says hi, but she wants to know, should we include our address on our resume? Is that still necessary, or does our name, email, and phone number suffice for contact info?
So it's interesting. So this actually happened to me in college, where I had this, and I went to some career coaching conversation, and they said, there's bias in the world. You want to remove like the city you live in, your address, all of that, because it's going to, have people say, oh, you live in X, Y, and Z city. We don't want to hire someone from there. Their commute's going to be too long, X, Y, and Z. So I remember I did that, and I removed it, and I just had my name and my information. And I got a call back for a job, which was great. But the recruiter did tell me, she did find it strange that I didn't have my information. So the recommendation that she gave me was, you don't have to put your exact address. You can just put the city. So I always recommend doing that. Just put the city and state that you live in. They don't need to know if you live on the north side of town, the south side of town. Just put the city that you live in. And that will help too, because they want to make sure that you are, prior to COVID, in a commutable distance of the job. Now we're in a lot of, virtual remote work from home situations, which I think is still a lot of our benefit right now. But I would say traditionally, just put the city and state. You don't have to put your exact address, because even in one city, they may have bias towards one neighborhood versus the other. So that's still a little bit at play. But I would recommend just putting the city to just, keep it even and keep it clean. And they still know where you live, but they don't need to know your exact address.
Great info. So we got Kristen, and she wants to know, is it true that you shouldn't put skills on your resume that you don't enjoy or wouldn't want to do again?
I wouldn't. That's the short one on that. If you don't enjoy it, if you don't see yourself doing it, I wouldn't lead with that or sell it. I would also look at what jobs you're applying for, because if it's a job that requires that skill, or for you to use that, side of your skill set, then maybe looking to do something else, or a job that doesn't require such a heavy lift in that. But I wouldn't do that, because you might get in a bind down the road, and you might get the interview and ultimately see that you don't want to do that job, or you're not going to be happy in that job. And I think patience is definitely key in a lot of respects, where you can wait out a little bit more for the right job. But what I would say is, of the skills that you do enjoy and you like doing, include those more in your resume as well, because they'll be able to see, oh, she likes this. She mentioned this keyword 5 times in her resume, and she didn't include, QuickBooks or whatever, in your resume as much. So I would say, if you don't like it, don't include it. If you do have the skill set, I would say, it's stuff, a selling point, put it on there, but definitely be more heavy on the things that you do enjoy and that you do have that natural aptitude for. Include that as much as possible to kind of lean the resume towards that, and do the thinking for the recruiter and show them, hey, I can do that over there, but I do this a lot and I do it really great. So you should just have me do that and don't ask me to do this over here.
And I believe it's also important to kind of, you have a guide and it's called a position description. So kind of stay there, pull the relevant skills from the position description, the ones that are aligned with what it is that you actually do. And then I think, to a point you made earlier, sometimes you have to look at the next level up and see what skills they're utilizing in that role. Because if you possess those skills as well, it may position you well organizationally. People want you to be able to stick around for a while. They want to make good hires. And if you're doing, and let's just say it's QuickBooks in your current role, but it's not necessary for the role that you're looking at, but it's necessary for the role above you, it may be a good ad.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's a way to look at it, right? All right. So do you have any tips for people who are looking to pivot career and/or industry?
Yes. So this is a conversation I have a lot. And a few parts of it are, one, that continuing education piece that I talked about before. So if you're trying to get into a new field, leveraging any resources that you have. So if you can get any certification, if that's possible, or in the realm of reality for you, or just taking any free online courses or classes, but really becoming a practitioner in what you want to do next. So that's a big thing for me, is making sure that you do have the qualifications to do the job that's in front of you, or the job that you want. Many times we, look at something and it looks really great and fancy. We can, take a engineer or software engineer job. My younger brother's an engineer and he's really smart and great at that. I don't want to do that. And that's just not my natural ability. So I never done it, though it's, looks glamorous. It's great. He's brilliant. He's amazing. But it's just not something I want to do. But I can, try to do it, grind, go to school, do all this stuff. And at the end of the day, I just may not feel it. But I would recommend looking at people who also are in the industry. So seeing if you can make those connections on LinkedIn or other social media to connect people who have the job that you want. That's one side of it. I have a lot of those conversations as well. So that's one piece of it. And the other side is, so that first part, educating yourself. 2, meeting people who do the job. And then 3 goes back to your cover letter again, or even that, interview summary. I think Tawanda brought that up earlier, but putting that summary on your resume and talking about that pivot that you're making as well. So talking about, hey, I'm currently doing this job. I'm looking to pivot into accounting and finance. I've been taking classes at the University of X, Y, and Z. I've taken X, Y, and Z classes. I'm now, proficient in these different technologies, and really outlining why you are great, at that skill set, and you're continuing to invest in yourself. But I would say use your cover letter and your resume to tell your story as much as possible. And again, I'm gonna keep going back to this, use that as a space to plug in those keywords. So if you're trying to get into accounting and all of that, that's a way where you may not have been an accountant before, but if you include those words on your resume or your cover letter and pepper in accountant and finance and QuickBooks or whatever technologies, that's a way that the ATS is going to pick it up for you, to say, oh, this person might be qualified. And then the recruiter or the human is going to read, oh, they're not an accountant yet, but I see, they're on the path to that, and let me call them in for an interview, because I think they have some potential based off of the raw material that they showed me in that cover letter.
Man, kudos to you and your brother. I think you guys got a podcast, The Evangelist and the Engineer. I like it. I think you can run with that. Let me know. Let me know if you need some help on that.
I will. Yes, I'll trademarking that too. So
there you go. We got a couple gems from today.
Yes.
And look, they want to know if cover letters are still necessary out here.
They are. So a lot of recruiters still look at them, and I would recommend, I know many times it's kind of a burden to want to, write a new cover letter and tell the story again, or tweak it for a different job, and, have a different cover letter for every job you apply for. I would say many times recruiters still look at them. I usually highly recommend them in those circumstances if you are making a pivot into a different industry or a new city and you're moving. Anything that needs any additional explanation that wouldn't just make sense on your resume, I always recommend doing that in a way to avoid that. So let's say you're just applying for a new job in the same field in your same city, but you just want to get to another company. That's where you don't necessarily have to rely on a cover letter as much, but that's where I highly recommend using those keywords. So making sure that it does go through the ATS, it does get to the recruiter, using those action verbs, talking about all of your accomplishments as well, where you don't necessarily have to explain things on the cover letter because you're in the industry, you do that work, you're in the same city, so there's not a lot to explain, but it does show that you're really amazing at it and that they should, give you a call for an interview.
That's a great answer. All right, listen, Erica wants to know. She says she's new to social media. Okay, here's why I'm asking this particular question.
Mm-hmm.
I want to just commend you. I think you do a great job on LinkedIn. I think people respond to stuff that you put out. You're very good at hyperlinking and including other people into your post and into the conversation. Mm-hmm. All stuff I think that's key to being effective on that platform. Erica wants to know, she's new to social media. How can she effectively use Indeed and LinkedIn in her job search?
Amazing. So, and thank you for your kind words. Ken. I appreciate it. Yeah, so I appreciate that. And this goes back to that intersection of technology and recruiting. So on one side, from the Indeed side, we're less of a social media platform. It's more of a job marketplace. So as a candidate, I recommend first definitely uploading your resume to Indeed. So doing that, and then making sure that you're using those keywords that we talked about as well. And because another part of my job as that coach is not just making sure that a company has a really great job description, a really great employer brand with fun photos and videos, and I consult them on that. Another part is that sourcing or recruiting, and that means that a recruiter is actually going to reach out to you directly. So you didn't even apply to the job, they just found you in the Indeed resume database. And the way that they search through that database is by keywords. So that's also the other benefit of having those keywords in your resume, is that recruiters search for that. And if your keyword of accountant is included 5 times, you may be seen as more qualified than the person who may have 10 years of experience, but they only have the word accountant included once. So the power of the keyword is real. And on the Indeed side, just making sure that you upload your resume and that it includes as many of those keywords as possible, because recruiters are not just looking through the applications that you fill out, they're also doing work on their, on their behalf to go search for people. So that's the Indeed side of the puzzle. The LinkedIn side that's more of that social media aspect where you can connect with people. I definitely will encourage everyone on this call to connect with me on LinkedIn if we're already not connected, but definitely doing that. And what that does is making that human connection. So if we're talking about you wanting to get a referral, which is one of the first questions that we talked about, if you don't know somebody at a company, but you see a really good job on LinkedIn, you can see, okay, some of the people in my network either work at the company that I'm trying to get into, or they went to school or know somebody who works at that company, and I can get introduced to them through LinkedIn and then ultimately get that person to refer me as well. So I always recommend on the LinkedIn side doing that. And even with that, I always recommend just having a good professional headshot with good lighting. So that's it. And then the same thing, your LinkedIn could really replicate your resume. So you just put your different work experience, also use those keywords because recruiters use LinkedIn as well. And then that bio section, so your biography section, is where you would put the information that you probably would put in your cover letter as well. And that tells who you are, what's your job? What are you as a professional? What are you pursuing in your educational pursuits? What are your hobbies as well? People do a lot with that, but you can really show your personality a lot more on your LinkedIn and make those connections with different people. But I definitely recommend you want to put a really good, solid foot forward, but leverage those relationships and those introductions to people to get those referrals as well.
Well, I'm glad you went in that direction, because we had another question regarding how, after we submit our resume via Indeed, how do we connect with the recruiters and our hiring managers? And you kind of jump over to LinkedIn and do your research, right? And see if you can kind of connect with someone. But I do want to caution people, you may want to explain that you've recently applied to the role or you have interest in that particular opportunity, but you don't want to start your LinkedIn conversation out asking people for favors that you don't know. I'm not sure that's the best way to come into that to that conversation. So be mindful of that and just express interest in them, their background, and share that you recently applied to an opportunity, but be mindful of how you're coming into the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so we have a Janice. So this is a really interesting question. She's in education limbo, she says.
Okay.
She has an AA, she has an associate's degree, and it's in the relevant field that she's applying to. However, the positions of interest always require that she has a bachelor's. Do you have any advice for breaking that barrier?
Yeah, so that's interesting. So there's two things. So I'll talk about it on like the systemic level. So it's kind of the larger issue that's at play in your case, Janice, where those education barriers are part of that, unconscious bias, or some of those barriers that are put in place where statistically many people of underrepresented groups, many times Black people, may not have, access to that higher level of education or the resources to fund those higher resources of education due to, X, Y, and Z, systems that we live in. So that's one part. And that's a conversation I also have with my clients when we talk about, the nice to have skills and the need to have skills. And some jobs in their companies, does this person need a bachelor's degree to do this job? Or do they just need that work experience? And as an associate, good enough? And it should be. I think you do have the qualifications to do the job. That shouldn't deter you or keep you out of doing that job. And they're also missing out on so much talent who may not have that, those extra 2 years of school. What does that mean? What does the customer actually care at the end of the day if you have a bachelor's or associate? So that's one conversation that I have more on the largest scale of the conversation, and really championing for that too, because many jobs don't necessarily need that. You just need some of those hard skills to do the job. You don't need that formal education, and who gets to define what degree is valuable or not. So I feel really strongly about that side of it. The other side, I would say, is on that, individual level too. So of course I know the resume says a bachelor is required, but anything that you can do to include a cover letter, any of that, additional information, I would probably say too, this might be a good circumstance, even in that, referral or LinkedIn side of the conversation, where you try to bypass the system, because it's so interesting, because it does speak to the larger conversation. The system is built for you to fail in that circumstance, which is unfortunate, because if they don't see bachelor, they may automatically discard you. However, if you talk to a recruiter or a human in the process, they may actually be able to hear your full story and actually talk to you and see, oh, she's completely qualified. And you might be that person that changes that system to say, okay, we hired Janice. She's a top performer. She has an associate's degree. She doesn't have a bachelor's, which means why do we require everybody else to at the end of the day? So there's a lot at play here, but I would say in your particular circumstance, looking for those, try the cover letter. Of course, if you already haven't, try to tell your story, but also including those, relevant keywords to that industry and to that job, but also trying to lead into those human relationships, seeing if you know anybody, if you can make any connections with anybody. But ultimately, I mean, Ken and I, we do this kind of work to advocate for, underrepresented groups, especially Black people, in a lot of circumstances where we are, the door is shut to us, and we even try to get our education and do that, and we still can't get in. So that's something I'm very passionate about on the bigger scale. But for, you and your day-to-day, I would say try some of those things to make some progress.
And Janice, as networking is the key for that particular scenario, right? And even when you're using a cover letter, which I would advise if you don't have all the requirements that are listed on the position description, tell a story that aligns you really well with either the company and or its products or services. If you can tie yourself to an organization with a very compelling story, it allows people to maybe want to have additional conversations with you, and then you can kind of network your way through the process. I hope that was helpful. Listen, there's information out there about that process on Careerlism. JT O'Donnell speaks really well about disruptive cover letters. She was one of our guests on the Digital Career Success Series a few months back. So you may want to Google disruptive cover letter JT O'Donnell to get some of that information. One more question, my friend,
Yes.
and we're going to work our way out of here, right? You've been doing an amazing job, right? So I'm just picking one. So this is Erica. She's regularly told that her resume is impressive, yet it's not generating much response on job sites. What could be the problem?
So first thing I would do, if I was Erica, I would ask for some specific feedback as to like what's not closing the deal, in that job, if it's impressive, I would say, what is impressive to you? So the person is giving you the feedback, find out what do they like about it. Is it the school that you went to? Is it the company that you work at? Just figuring out what do they like about it, and then also any feedback from that respect. The other side of it too is, one, leaning into those skills again. So making sure that it is strong from that search engine optimization and that keyword matching perspective. I'm very passionate about that too. Making sure that you are selling that as hard as you can and including those keywords as much as you can, because unfortunately, when you are working with artificial intelligence, it's coded and it's taught to look at certain things. It's not taking into account a lot of these nuances of a person. They're looking at you based off of those words. So like I said before, if you're a person who has 10 years of experience, but you only include the word once, but the person who just started 2 years ago and they have the word included 8 times, on that paper, they may be seen as more qualified, the person who has much less experience. So that would be one side of it. And the other side is a lot of those action verbs and talking about your accomplishments in that job too. And not to say this is to you specifically, Erica, but I've seen just in general a lot of the recent conversations of many times professionals will lean on, oh, well, I worked at Google, I worked at this company, I worked at that company. That's great, but tell me about you. So that's a big part that I always recommend people to know that, at the end of the day, at these companies and these great cultures, the people make the party. So these companies are so great and amazing because of the people that work there. And you want to be one of those amazing people that are invited to that party. So tell them why you should be on the guest list and highlight those keywords, use those action verbs. But I think that could be another thing too, is to just take another look at your resume and see, am I really selling this? What am I selling? Or also, are there any bullet points that I can remove? What might be redundant or would not be relevant right now? But I would also, main thing is go back to the drawing board, talk to those people that told you that your resume is impressive or that you need some updating, and get some more specific feedback from them to see what you can do. But from my side, not seeing your resume, just understanding the technology of it, use those keywords, use those action verbs as much as possible and sell yourself. Those schools and workplaces that you worked at are fabulous, but making sure that you're selling the Erica package and the Erica experience as much as you can. But definitely go back to those people that gave you the feedback to see what were their deeper thoughts on that.
Man, I love it. Listen, feedback, you were great today. Speaking of being on the guest list, man, you're always welcome back to the Urban League Jobs Network. You were amazing. I really appreciate you taking the time to share your unique level of expertise with the Urban League Jobs Network audience, man. Incredible. I didn't think we were going to make it through. There's still a ton of questions, so we want to save them for another time. But listen, if people have some questions for you, how do they get connected?
Yes, and thank you so much for having me. Thank you for creating a forum for us to have this conversation. I'm always happy to participate. And of course, definitely everyone can reach out to me on LinkedIn, and it's just Kaishan Holloway on LinkedIn. I know they dropped that in the chat. So definitely look me up and connect with me on there. I'll usually get back to messages. I check them at least once a week, so give me a little time, but I will get back to you. But I love having this conversation, and I love helping people get jobs, especially Black people, especially LGBT people, anyone who's underserved in any way. I'm happy to help just in general, but please reach out to me. I'm an open book and happy to help you as much as possible. And I love to see other people win. So just reach out.
Man, this is exactly what we do here on the National Urban League platform. Listen, on behalf of Devin, Felix, Wanda Jackson, and the team at the National Urban League, I really want to sincerely say thank you, my friend. You were amazing today. You know what? You segued me right into where I needed to go. You told people to connect with you on LinkedIn. Hold tight, everyone. Connect with him after our September 2nd show, because we're going to speak about LinkedIn and how to curate your professional profile on LinkedIn. So when you connect with people like Mr. Holloway, you want to come with the right profile. You want to have a very good LinkedIn presence. So we're going to help you with that September 2nd right here on the Urban League Jobs Network. I'm Kenneth L. Johnson, your host. It's been great again. Thank you for all the questions, and we'll do it again in a couple weeks. Take care.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.